I'm Thelma, 28 years old, and I just got fired from the company I helped build for the past decade. The email arrived while I sat in what used to be my father's office, sent by my sister Diane, who'd crowned herself CEO 3 days ago. I burst out laughing so hard that security came running. They thought I'd lost my mind, but I wasn't crazy. I was holding a document that made Diane's power grab the most hilarious mistake she'd ever make. She had no idea I owned 51% of everything. Before I continue this wild story of family betrayal and sweet justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you dealing with toxic family members in your own life? Hit that like button if you've ever had a relative. Try to steal what's rightfully yours, and don't forget to subscribe because trust me, this revenge story gets more satisfying with every twist. Let's dive into how my wannabe actress sister thought she could steal our family empire and why her grand plan blew up in her face so spectacularly. The morning Diane fired me, I'd already been locked out of my own office for 2 days. But to understand how we got here, you need to know our history. For 10 years, I'd worked alongside our father building Mitchell Construction from a small residential contractor into a multi-million-dollar commercial construction firm. While Diane chased Hollywood dreams in Los Angeles, I was learning every aspect of the business. I started as a project coordinator fresh out of college, worked my way through estimating project management, and eventually became vice president of operations. Our crews respected me because I'd earned my position, not inherited it. Diane returned 6 months ago with nothing to show for her acting career except debt and a bruised ego. Suddenly, she was fascinated by the family business she'd once called beneath her artistic soul. Our father, always soft when it came to Diane, welcomed her back and created a meaningless position for her in marketing. She spent most of her time posting on social media and attending networking lunches on the company dime. Then 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Dad suffered a massive heart attack during a site inspection. While I rode in the ambulance holding his hand, Diane was already on the phone with lawyers. By the time Dad was stable but sedated in the ICU, she'd manipulated the situation to get temporary power of attorney, claiming I was too emotional to make rational decisions. The hospital staff later told me she'd spent hours sweet-talking Dad's cardiologist, painting herself as the responsible daughter while suggesting I was having a breakdown. The first sign of her true intentions came when I returned to the office after a 16-hour vigil at Dad's bedside. My keycard wouldn't work. The security guard, looking embarrassed, informed me that the new CEO had ordered all access codes changed for security purposes. I had to call my assistant to let me into my own office. That's when I noticed things were missing. Files I'd meticulously maintained for years, contact lists I'd built from scratch, even personal photos had vanished. My husband Brian, who worked as our company's senior accountant, called me that afternoon with disturbing news. Diane had frozen my company credit cards and restricted my access to all financial systems. "She's telling everyone you've been too stressed to handle responsibilities," Brian said, his voice tight with anger. "She's already had meetings with 3 board members suggesting you might have contributed to your father's heart attack by overworking him." The scope of her campaign became clear over the next 48 hours. Every major client received a call from Diane introducing herself as the new CEO and subtly suggesting I'd been making erratic decisions that she would now correct. She told our biggest client, Jameson Developments, that I'd been hospitalized for exhaustion and wouldn't be available for the foreseeable future. When Tom Jameson called me directly to express concern, I realized Diane wasn't just trying to take over. She was systematically destroying my reputation. That's when Walter Brennan entered the picture. Walter had been our company's legal counsel for 20 years and one of my grandmother Grace's closest friends. He appeared at my house late Tuesday evening, looking troubled. "Thelma, we need to talk about your grandmother's will," he said, glancing around nervously, as if Diane might be listening. There are things about the company ownership that your sister doesn't know. Things your grandmother made me promise to keep confidential until the right moment. As Walter spoke, pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began falling into place. Grandmother Grace hadn't just been the family matriarch. She'd been the original investor who helped my grandfather start the company 60 years ago, and she'd been far more strategic about protecting the family legacy than anyone realized. But before Walter could explain everything, his phone rang. It was the office security company informing him that someone was attempting to access the executive file room after hours using his old access code. We both knew who it had to be. Diane was getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. What she didn't know was that she'd already made her biggest one. The termination email she'd sent me that morning, stripping me of all titles and responsibilities, had triggered a clause in my grandmother's will that Diane couldn't possibly have known about. As Walter explained the details, I felt my shock transform into something else entirely. For the first time since Dad's heart attack, I smiled. Diane thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn that Grandmother Grace had already won the game before it even started. Diane's CEO announcement party was scheduled for Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Dad's heart attack. She'd rented the ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, invited every major contractor and supplier in the state, and even hired a photographer to document her triumph. I received my invitation through my personal email, not my company one, since I'd been locked out of that, too. The message dripped with fake concern. Dear Thelma, I hope you'll attend to show the community we're united during this difficult time with Dad. Your support would mean everything. I almost admired her audacity. The ballroom was packed when I arrived with Brian. Diane had positioned herself at the entrance greeting guests in a designer suit that probably cost more than most of our workers made in a month. When she saw me, her smile tightened. "Thelma, so glad you could make it," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I know this transition has been hard for you, but I'm sure you'll find new opportunities that better suit your capabilities." Several clients looked uncomfortable at her condescending tone, but Diane was already moving on to her next victims. The real show began during her speech. Standing at the podium with our company logo behind her, Diane painted herself as the savior, returning home to rescue the family business from mismanagement. She never mentioned me by name, but her implications were clear. Recent financial irregularities had been discovered. Concerning patterns in expense reports needed investigation. New leadership with fresh perspectives would restore client confidence. I watched our clients exchange glances, some looking at me with pity, others with suspicion. Then she delivered her masterstroke. "I've asked Hartman Accounting to conduct a full audit," she announced. "Transparency is essential as we move forward. Any employee found to have engaged in financial misconduct will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." She looked directly at me as she said it. Brian's hand tightened on mine. We both knew Hartman Accounting was owned by her college roommate's husband. Any audit they conducted would find exactly what Diane wanted them to find. My cousin Rita, who'd worked as VP of Operations for 5 years, wouldn't meet my eyes during the party. When I cornered her by the buffet table, she fidgeted with her champagne glass. "Diane offered me Senior Executive VP, she admitted quietly. "With Dad sick and you apparently leaving, I have to think about my future. I've got kids in college, Thelma. I can't afford to pick the losing side." The betrayal stung worse than Diane's actions. Rita had spent Thanksgiving at my house, played with my daughter, called me her sister. Now she was parroting Diane's lies about my mental state to anyone who would listen. The next blow came Monday morning when Tom Jameson called. "Thelma, I hate to do this, but we're pulling the Riverside Plaza project," he said, sounding genuinely upset. Diane showed us some concerning financial projections and suggested the company might not be stable enough to complete a project of this scale. We can't risk $3 million on a company in transition. I'm sorry. I wanted to scream that the projections were fabricated, that we had more than enough bonding capacity, but what was the point? Diane had poisoned the well. That afternoon, Carlos Mendoza found me at the coffee shop where I'd set up my temporary office. The 60-year-old foreman had worked for our company since before I was born. He slid into the booth across from me, his weathered face creased with worry. "Miss Thelma, you need to know what's happening," he said in his accented English. "Your sister, she brought men in suits to the yard yesterday. They measured everything, took photos. I heard her telling them about liquidation value and quick sale potential. She's planning to sell everything your family built." The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Destroying me was one thing, but selling the company, that was destroying Dad's legacy. Our employees' livelihoods, everything 3 generations had built. "How much does she owe Carlos?" I asked, already knowing there had to be debts driving this desperation. Carlos shook his head. "I don't know exact numbers, but I heard her on the phone begging someone for more time. She mentioned $800,000 and something about production loans coming due." The pieces clicked together. Diane's Hollywood dreams hadn't just failed, they'd left her in massive debt. She'd probably borrowed against her expected inheritance to fund pilots that never aired and showcases that led nowhere. Now she was back to grab what she thought was her lifeline, not caring who she destroyed in the process. But her next move shocked even me. Wednesday morning, 2 uniformed officers appeared at my door with a restraining order. According to the document I'd been making, threatening gestures and creating a hostile work environment that made Diane fear for her safety. The order banned me from coming within 500 feet of any company property or attempting to contact any company employees. Brian exploded when he read it, but I felt oddly calm. Diane was overplaying her hand-making moves that looked strong but actually revealed her desperation. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by boxes of family photos and company memorabilia I'd managed to save. My daughter asked why I wasn't going to work anymore, and I struggled to explain that sometimes families fight over things that shouldn't matter more than love. As I tucked her in, I remembered something Grandmother Grace used to say. "When someone shows you their true character, believe them, but when they declare war on you, make sure you're holding the better weapons." I kissed my daughter goodnight and went downstairs to call Walter. It was time to open Grandmother's arsenal. 3 years before she died, Grandmother Grace had summoned me to her bedside. At 92, she was sharp as ever, but her body was failing. "Thelma, dear, I need to tell you something about the company," she'd whispered, her paper-thin hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "Your grandfather liked to tell people he built this business from nothing, but that was male pride talking. I put up the money every penny of the initial investment, and I made sure to protect it." She'd given me a key to a safety deposit box and made me promise not to open it unless the company was truly threatened. Now, sitting in Walter's law office at 7 in the morning to avoid Diane's spies, I watched him extract documents from that box with reverential care. "Your grandmother was brilliant," he said, laying out papers covered in legal language. "When your grandfather incorporated the business, she insisted on an unusual ownership structure. Publicly, your grandfather owned everything, but privately, she retained 51% through a holding company that's been dormant for decades. When she died, that ownership passed to you." My hands shook as I read the documents. Every signature was authenticated, every transfer notarized. Grandmother Grace had even included a letter explaining her reasoning. "I've watched how money changes families, how power corrupts love. I'm leaving this controlling interest to Thelma because she earned her place through work, not birthright. She understands that a company is more than its bank accounts. It's the people who pour their sweat and dreams into building something greater than themselves." Walter pulled out more papers. "There's more." Your grandmother included very specific triggering clauses. If any family member attempts to remove another family member from the company without board approval and due cause the dormant holding company automatically activates. Diane's termination email to you triggered this clause. As of this moment, you legally control the company. I stared at the papers, feeling Grandmother Grace's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting what mattered. The next morning brought fresh hell. Brian called from his sister's house where he'd gone to review some personal financial documents. "Don't come home," he said urgently. "Derek's car is in our driveway. I can see him through the window sitting in our living room with Diane." Derek. My ex-boyfriend from 5 years ago, the man who'd cheated on me with his personal trainer and then tried to claim I owed him alimony despite never being married. The man who'd stolen my credit cards and run up $20,000 in debt before I caught him. An hour later, the reason for Derek's resurrection became clear. Diane had hired him as the new chief operating officer, my old position. The company-wide email announcing his appointment praised his fresh perspective and innovative approach to leadership. It also mentioned his previous close working relationship with former management, a not-so-subtle dig at me. Employees who'd watched Derek's spectacular flame-out from our relationship were now expected to report to him. By afternoon, Derek was earning his paycheck. Stories began circulating through the construction community about my instability during our relationship. According to Derek's version, I'd been controlling paranoid and prone to emotional outbursts. He claimed he'd left me because he feared for his safety, a complete reversal of reality. The restraining order I'd filed against him after he'd shown up drunk at my workplace had conveniently disappeared from his narrative. Sandra Mitchell, no relation despite the last name, had been my best friend since high school and our HR director for 6 years. When she didn't return my calls for 2 days, I knew something was wrong. Brian's sister Maria, who still worked in accounting, finally told me the truth. "Sandra's been in Diane's office every day this week. Yesterday I saw her carrying boxes of personnel files, including yours." "I'm sorry, Thelma. I think she's helping them build some kind of case against you." The betrayal from Sandra cut deeper than all the others. She'd been my maid of honor, my daughter's godmother, the person I'd cried with when my mother died. Now she was handing over confidential information about my medical leave after my miscarriage, my therapy sessions during the Derek situation, anything that could be twisted to support Diane's narrative of instability. When Maria mentioned Sandra had been promised the VP of Human Resources position with a 40% salary increase, the betrayal at least made financial sense. That evening, Walter called with urgency in his voice. "They've filed a petition for involuntary psychiatric evaluation," he said. "Diane's claiming you're delusional, that you've been making threats that you believe you own the company through some imaginary inheritance. Derek signed an affidavit about your past mental health issues, and Sandra provided documentation about concerning behavior patterns from HR files." The coordinated attack was breathtaking in its cruelty. They weren't just trying to steal the company, they were trying to have me declared incompetent. But while they'd been plotting my forced hospitalization, Brian had been conducting his own investigation. Using his access to archived financial records before it was revoked, he'd discovered a pattern of suspicious transactions dating back to Diane's return. Money had been moving from company accounts to shell corporations, always just under the amounts that required board notification. The trail led to offshore accounts in the Caymans and Belize. Diane wasn't just stealing the company, she'd already been stealing from it. "She's been siphoning off about $50,000 a month," Brian explained, showing me spreadsheets on his laptop. "Small enough amounts to fly under the radar, but it adds up to $300,000 so far. And look at this, she's been paying Derek's consulting firm for services that were never performed. He's been on the payroll for 2 months before he was officially hired." The evidence was damning, but would anyone listen to accusations from the mentally unstable former executive and her husband? That night, I sat with my daughter as she did her homework, helping her with math problems while my world crumbled around me. She looked up at me with innocent eyes and asked, "Mommy, why is Aunt Diane being mean to you?" I couldn't explain adult cruelty to a 7-year-old. Couldn't tell her that sometimes family members become enemies when money is involved. Instead, I told her that sometimes people get confused about what's important, but that truth always wins in the end. Later, after she was asleep, I pulled out the ownership documents again. Diane thought she'd won by casting me as the crazy sister who'd snapped under pressure. She had Derek playing the concerned ex-boyfriend Sandra, the worried friend Rita, the responsible cousin stepping up in a crisis. It was a masterful character assassination that would have worked perfectly except for one thing. You can't steal what already belongs to someone else, and no amount of lies could change the legal reality of those papers. Tomorrow I would begin my counterattack. Diane wanted to play dirty. She was about to learn that Grandmother Grace had taught me more than just business ethics. She'd also taught me how to win. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock Monday morning. Walter had used my grandmother's ownership authority to call it sending notices to all 7 board members late Friday afternoon. The timing was strategic because Diane would have minimal time to prepare countermeasures over the weekend. She'd tried calling Walter repeatedly, but he'd let everything go to voicemail. Her increasingly frantic messages revealed her growing panic as she realized something was happening outside her control. I arrived at the company headquarters at 8:45, my first time approaching the building since the restraining order. As expected, Diane had hired a security team to block my entrance. 6 large men in black uniforms stood at the main doors, hands on their radios. The lead guard stepped forward as I approached. "Ma'am, we have orders that you're not allowed on the premises," he said not unkindly. Behind him, I could see employees gathering in the lobby watching the drama unfold. "I understand," I replied calmly, pulling out my phone. "Walter, I'm being prevented from entering my own building. Please proceed with informing the board about the ownership structure." I put the call on speaker so the guards could hear. Walter's voice boomed clearly. "Security personnel should be advised that preventing the majority owner from entering constitutes unlawful restraint. Personal liability attaches to anyone who continues this obstruction after being informed of Ms. Mitchell's ownership status." The guards exchanged uncertain looks. Their leader spoke into his radio, presumably consulting with Diane. I could see her through the glass doors, pacing in the lobby in a red power suit, gesturing wildly as she spoke into her phone. After a tense moment, the guard stepped aside. "Our employer says you're trespassing, but we're not risking personal lawsuits. You can enter, but she says the police are on their way." I smiled and walked past them, my heels clicking confidently on the marble floor I'd helped select 5 years ago. The boardroom was already full when I entered. 5 of the 7 board members were present, including Uncle Joseph, who gave me a subtle nod. Diane burst in moments later, her face flushed with rage. "This is illegal harassment," she announced to the room. "My sister is having some kind of breakdown. I have documentation from medical professionals about her mental state. Security, remove her immediately." The guards hovering in the doorway didn't move, clearly done with being pawns in our family drama. Walter stood and opened his briefcase with theatrical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I'm here to inform you of a material change in company ownership structure." He began distributing copies of the authenticated documents. Grace Mitchell retained 51% ownership of Mitchell Construction through a holding company. Upon her death, this controlling interest passed to Thelma Mitchell. These documents have been verified by 3 independent law firms specializing in corporate ownership. The room erupted. Board members who'd been treating Diane like the new queen suddenly looked at her with different eyes. Harold Peterson, our longest-serving board member, studied the papers through his reading glasses. "Diane, Were you aware of this ownership structure when you assumed control? He asked pointedly. Diane's response came out as a shriek. Those documents are forged. This is exactly the kind of delusion I've been warning you about. She's created an elaborate fantasy where our dead grandmother left her the company. Interesting theory, Walter said dryly. Perhaps you can explain why these documents were notarized 30 years ago, filed with the state and reference bank accounts that have been dormant but verified. He pulled out bank statements showing the holding company's existence dating back decades. Or perhaps you'd like to explain why Grace Mitchell's will, filed in probate court 3 years ago, specifically references this transfer of ownership. Diane's carefully constructed composure cracked. Even if those documents are real, Thelma is mentally unfit to run anything. I have sworn affidavits about her instability. Her ex-boyfriend, Derek Williams, has provided extensive documentation about her paranoid behavior. Our HR director has files showing concerning patterns. She waved a folder of papers like a weapon. I had to take control to save this company from her deteriorating mental state. Fascinating, I said, speaking for the first time. Derek Williams, who's currently wanted in 2 states for fraud, the same Derek Williams you hired as COO despite his complete lack of construction experience, the same man I had a restraining order against for stalking and harassment. I'm sure the board would love to see the police reports I filed. I pulled out my own folder thick with documentation. Or perhaps we should discuss the $300,000 that's been transferred to shell companies since you took control. The accusation landed like a bomb. Several board members started talking at once, demanding explanations. Diane tried to regain control. Those transfers were legitimate business expenses, consulting fees for the transition. Thelma's the one who's been embezzling. That's why I had to act quickly to protect company assets. She turned to the board with practiced sincerity. I discovered irregularities in her expense accounts going back years. Hartman Accounting will confirm this in their audit. Walter smiled. Ah, yes, Hartman Accounting. Run by your college roommate's husband. I'm sure they'll find exactly what you tell them to find. However, the board might be interested in this. He produced another document. This is a preliminary report from Fitzgerald Forensic Accounting, a firm with no connection to either sister. They've identified systematic transfers from company accounts to offshore entities, all initiated after Diane gained access to the financial systems. Brian entered the room, then laptop in hand. Sorry I'm late. I've been compiling transaction records that Diane's team hasn't had time to alter yet. He connected his laptop to the presentation screen. Here, you can see $50,000 transfers each one, just under the board notification threshold sent to companies registered in the Caymans. The signing authority Diane Mitchell using the CFO access she granted herself 3 days after our father's heart attack. Diane's mask finally slipped completely. You can't prove anything. I was protecting the company from her. She's unstable. Tell them Sandra. Tell them about her mental health issues. Sandra, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. When she didn't immediately speak, Diane's voice turned sharp. Sandra, tell them about the files about her therapy sessions about the medications. Sandra stood slowly, her hands trembling. I can't do this anymore. Diane promised me a promotion if I helped build a case against Thelma. She told me Thelma was planning to fire me anyway, that I had to choose sides. But those HR files, they don't show instability. They show a woman dealing with normal life stresses, a miscarriage, a bad breakup. I violated my professional ethics and my friendship. I'm sorry, Thelma. I'm so sorry. The boardroom door opened again, and 2 police officers entered, followed by Tom Jameson and several other major clients I recognized. We received Walter's message about an emergency meeting regarding company ownership, Tom said. Given our significant contracts with Mitchell Construction, we felt we should be informed about any leadership changes. He looked at Diane with disgust, especially since some of us were told lies about Thelma's mental state to manipulate our business decisions. Derek chose that moment to make his entrance, strutting in with the confidence of someone who didn't realize the tide had already turned. "Sorry I'm late, babe," he said to Diane, the casual endearment revealing more than any accusation could. "The lawyers said the psychiatric hold paperwork should be approved by this afternoon. We can have her committed for 72-hour observation, and that should give us enough time to—" He trailed off, finally noticing the room's hostile atmosphere and the police presence. "Mr. Williams!" One of the officers stepped forward. "We have a warrant for your arrest on fraud charges from Nevada. You'll need to come with us." Derek's face went white as he realized his mistake. He'd been hiding out in another state to avoid arrest, but Diane had lured him back with promises of easy money. As the officers cuffed him, he started babbling about Diane's promises, how she'd said they'd split the company's sale proceeds, how the whole plan had been her idea. Diane made one last desperate play. "This is a conspiracy. You're all against me because I'm trying to modernize this company. Dad would be ashamed of all of you, especially you, Thelma. I'm his real daughter, not some adopted charity case he took in out of pity." The words hung in the air like poison. Even board members who'd been neutral looked shocked. I'd been adopted, yes, but our parents had never treated me as anything less than their biological child. For Diane to weaponize that now revealed the depth of her hatred. "Actually, Uncle Joseph finally spoke up. Your father called me from the hospital yesterday. He's awake and coherent. He asked me to read this statement to the board." He pulled out his phone and played a voice recording. Dad's weak but clear voice filled the room. "I, Robert Mitchell, being of sound mind, fully support Thelma Mitchell as the rightful leader of Mitchell Construction. I was wrong to let Diane manipulate the situation while I was ill. Thelma has my complete confidence and should be restored to her position immediately." The vote was unanimous. The board formally recognized my ownership and appointed me as CEO effective immediately. Diane was removed from all positions and banned from company property. As security escorted her out, she screamed threats about lawsuits and revenge, but her power was broken. The employees in the lobby burst into applause as I walked through. Carlos and his construction crews had gathered to watch the drama unfold, and their cheers brought tears to my eyes. But we weren't done yet. As the police led Derek away and Diane's supporters scattered, I turned to the board. "Now let's discuss the criminal charges we'll be filing for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. And then I want to talk about raises for the employees who've stayed loyal through this chaos." The battle was won, but the war for justice was just beginning. Tuesday morning started with an ominous phone call. Brian answered our home phone at 6:30, his face darkening as he listened. "That was our bank," he said after hanging up. "Someone tried to wire $5 million from the company's primary operating account to an offshore bank at 4 this morning. The transaction was flagged because it exceeded daily limits, but they had all the proper authorization codes." Diane's final desperate move had begun, but this time we were ready. Walter had anticipated something like this. After yesterday's board meeting, he'd worked through the night to freeze vulnerable accounts and change all access protocols. The attempted wire transfer had failed, but it revealed something disturbing. Diane had deeper help than just Derek. Someone with sophisticated knowledge of international banking was orchestrating this final assault. That someone revealed himself 2 hours later when Vincent Torino walked into my office without knocking. Vincent looked like a Hollywood casting director's idea of a legitimate businessman. Expensive suit, perfect teeth, and cold eyes that had seen too much. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, settling into a chair uninvited. "I represent a group of investors interested in purchasing Mitchell Construction. Your sister has already agreed to terms very favorable to your family. $20 million cash for a quick, clean sale. All debts forgiven, all investigations dropped." The implied threat in those last words made my skin crawl. "Mr. Torino," I don't know what my sister told you, but she has no authority to sell anything. I'm the majority owner and CEO. Mitchell Construction is not for sale. I kept my voice steady despite my racing heart. Vincent's smile reminded me of a shark circling prey. That's unfortunate. Your sister owes my associates $800,000. She borrowed it to fund her entertainment ventures using her future inheritance as collateral. Now she can't pay, and my associates are not patient people. The pieces clicked into place. Diane's Hollywood dreams had led her to the worst kind of lenders. When legitimate banks turned her down, she'd gone to people who collected debts with baseball bats instead of lawyers. Now they wanted their money, and they'd seen our successful construction company as an easy mark. Your sister assured us the sale would go through this week, Vincent continued. If it doesn't well, debts have a way of transferring to family members, especially family members with beautiful daughters who walk to school every morning. The threat against my child flipped a switch in my brain from fear to fury. Get out of my office before I call the police, I said coldly. And if you or anyone associated with you comes near my family, you'll discover that construction workers are very protective of their own. Carlos Mendoza has 60 crew members who've watched my daughter grow up. They're all armed with more than hammers, and they know how to make problems disappear in concrete. It was a bluff, but Vincent didn't know that. After he left, I immediately called the FBI field office. Threatening a child crossed lines that even dirty money didn't usually touch. Agent Sarah Coleman arrived within an hour, all business in her dark suit. We've been watching Vincent Torino for 3 years, she said after I explained the situation. He's connected to money laundering operations running through construction companies across the Southwest. Your sister walked into the middle of an ongoing federal investigation. She smiled grimly, but her stupidity might be our opportunity to finally nail him. Wednesday brought a new crisis. Our project foreman called from the Riverside Plaza site where Tom Jameson had just reinstated our contract. Boss, you need to get here now. There's been sabotage. I arrived to find 3 of our excavators destroyed hydraulic lines, cut control panels smashed with sledgehammers. The message spray painted on one machine was clear: sell or burn. The damage would cost hundreds of thousands to repair and delay the project by weeks. But Vincent had underestimated the construction community. Within hours, competitors who'd been rivals for decades started calling. Heard you had equipment trouble, said Jack Morrison from Morrison Building Group. I've got 3 spare excavators you can borrow, no charge. Nobody threatens one of us without threatening all of us. By afternoon, equipment was arriving from construction companies across the state. The attempted intimidation had backfired spectacularly. Diane made her next move Thursday morning. My assistant rushed into my office pale-faced. There's smoke coming from the archives room. The fire department is on the way. We evacuated the building as firefighters arrived. The fire was quickly controlled, but the damage was strategic years of financial records contracts, and project documentation had been destroyed. Without those papers, prosecuting Diane's embezzlement would be nearly impossible, or it would have been if Brian hadn't spent the previous month secretly digitizing everything. After she locked you out, I knew she'd try something like this, he explained as we watched firefighters carry out soggy boxes. I've been coming in at 4 in the morning to scan documents. Everything's backed up on encrypted drives in 3 locations. Diane had destroyed worthless copies while the originals remained safe. The security footage showing her entering the building at 3 a.m. with a gas can was just icing on the cake. The arrest warrant for Diane was issued Thursday afternoon, but she'd vanished. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected. Even Vincent Torino claimed not to know where she'd gone. Your sister owes us money, he said when Agent Coleman questioned him. We have as much interest in finding her as you do. The FBI didn't believe him, but without proof, they couldn't hold him. Diane had managed to make enemies of both law enforcement and organized crime a spectacular achievement in self-destruction. Friday morning, Sandra came to my office carrying a box of personal items. "I'm resigning," she said simply. "What I did was unforgivable. I betrayed 16 years of friendship for a promotion that was never real. I've written a full confession about everything Diane asked me to do, including creating false documentation about your mental health. It's all in here along with recordings I made of our conversations. I know it doesn't undo the harm, but maybe it helps with the legal case." I studied my former best friend, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. "Why, Sandra? We were family. You're my daughter's godmother. How could a job title matter more than that?" She started crying, then ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "My husband lost his job 6 months ago. We're behind on the mortgage the kids need college tuition. When Diane offered that salary increase, I saw a way out of drowning. I'm not making excuses, just explaining. I chose money over integrity and lost everything that actually mattered." Carlos knocked on the door, interrupting the painful moment. "Boss, you need to see this. We found something in the plaza excavation." At the job site, workers had uncovered a steel box buried in fresh concrete. Inside were documents, contracts with Vincent's shell companies, bank routing numbers for offshore accounts, and most damning, a life insurance policy on our father worth $10 million with Diane as sole beneficiary purchased 2 days before his heart attack. "She wasn't just planning to steal the company," Walter said after reviewing the documents. "She was potentially planning something much worse." The implications made me nauseous. Had Dad's heart attack been natural, or had Diane somehow triggered it? The police reopened their investigation this time, looking at attempted murder charges. The young woman who'd played with dolls alongside me had apparently grown into someone capable of plotting patricide for profit. That evening, Vincent made his last mistake. The FBI had been monitoring his communications, waiting for him to slip up. When he called an associate to discuss removing the Mitchell problem permanently, they had enough for arrest warrants. The raids happened simultaneously across 3 states. Vincent's organization crumbled as members rushed to make deals with prosecutors. Several mentioned Diane's name, describing her as surprisingly ruthless for a failed actress. Saturday morning, Diane was spotted at the Mexican border trying to cross with a fake passport. Her arrest photo showed a woman who'd aged 10 years in a week. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap disguise that fooled no one. As they led her away in handcuffs, she reportedly screamed that it was all my fault that I'd stolen her birthright, that our grandmother had always loved me more. Even facing federal charges, she couldn't acknowledge her own choices had led to her downfall. But the real shock came Sunday when our father called from the hospital. "Thelma, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I found Diane's vitamins in my home office, the ones she insisted I take for my heart. I had them tested. They weren't vitamins. They were blood thinners 3 times the normal dose. Combined with my regular medication, they could have killed me. My cardiologist says I'm lucky to be alive." The final piece of Diane's plan became clear. She'd been slowly poisoning our father, hoping to trigger a fatal heart attack that would look natural. With Vincent's organization dismantled and Diane in federal custody, the immediate threats were over. But the damage to our family was permanent. How do you process the fact that your sister tried to kill your father for money? How do you explain to relatives why holiday dinners will forever have an empty chair? How do you trust anyone again after such complete betrayal? These questions haunted me as I sat in Dad's hospital room watching him sleep, grateful he was still breathing despite Diane's best efforts to stop that breath forever. The federal courthouse downtown had never seen a crowd like this for an embezzlement case. Construction workers mixed with business owners, all wanting to witness Diane's judgment day. 6 months had passed since her arrest at the border, and the list of charges had grown to include attempted murder, wire fraud, embezzlement conspiracy, and arson. The FBI had built an airtight case using Vincent's organization's testimony, Sandra's recordings, and the digital evidence Brian had preserved. But Diane had one last card to play, and none of us saw it coming. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, announced Diane's lawyer, a slick defender known for getting wealthy criminals reduced sentences. Ms. Mitchell has been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and acute stress disorder. Her actions were the result of untreated mental illness exacerbated by childhood trauma of discovering her sister was the favored adopted child while she, the biological daughter, was constantly overlooked. I nearly laughed at the irony. She'd tried to have me committed, and now she was claiming insanity herself. The prosecutor, Janet Morrison, wasn't having it. The defendant methodically planned these crimes over months. She researched poison dosages, created shell companies, forged documents, and recruited co-conspirators. This wasn't mental illness. It was greed, pure and simple. She presented evidence of Diane's Google searches. How much digoxin causes heart attack? Untraceable poisons. How to fake financial records. And most damning, how long before life insurance pays out after death. Then came the parade of witnesses. Vincent Torino, now in federal custody, testified via video link. Diane Mitchell approached us, not the other way around. She had a whole presentation about the company's value potential buyers, how she'd eliminate obstacles to a quick sale. When I asked about her sister, she said, "Thelma won't be a problem for much longer." I thought she meant legally. Now I realize she meant something darker. Even hardened criminals seemed unsettled by Diane's cold calculation. Carlos testified about finding the burned financial records and the buried documents. 40 years I've worked construction, he said, his accent thick with emotion. I've seen family businesses torn apart by greed, but never like this. She tried to destroy everything 3 generations built, and for what? Money she would have inherited anyway if she'd just waited and worked honestly. His testimony carried weight with the jury, several of whom nodded along with his words. When Sandra took the stand, Diane's mask finally slipped. "You treacherous witch!" she screamed, jumping to her feet. "I made you everything you are. You were nothing before I offered you that promotion. Nothing." The judge banged his gavel as bailiffs moved toward Diane. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she continued ranting. "You all worship Thelma like she's some saint. She stole my life, my father's love, my inheritance. Everything was supposed to be mine." Sandra remained composed despite Diane's outburst. She detailed every request Diane had made, every document she'd been asked to forge, every lie she'd been told to spread. The worst part was when she asked me to plant drugs in Thelma's office. I refused, and that's when she threatened to destroy my career if I didn't cooperate fully. I should have gone to the police then, but I was scared and compromised. I'm prepared for whatever consequences I face for my actions. The most painful testimony came from our father. Still weak but determined, he took the stand against his own daughter. "I raised both my girls the same," he said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Gave them equal love, equal opportunities. Diane chose to see inequality where none existed. When I discovered she'd been poisoning me, that she'd purchased life insurance planning for my death, something in me broke. That's not mental illness. That's evil, pure evil wearing my daughter's face." Derek, trying to save himself, revealed more of Diane's schemes from prison. "She contacted me 6 months before moving back home. Said she discovered her sister had stolen from the company and she needed my help proving it. When I got here and found no evidence, she told me to create some. She promised me 10% of the sale price, about $2 million. I've done bad things, but attempting murder, that was all her. I just wanted the money." Then came surprise testimony that shocked everyone. Our mother, who'd been staying with her sister since the scandal broke, took the stand. I hadn't spoken to her in months, assuming she'd side with her biological daughter. "I need to tell the truth," she said quietly. "Diane came to me before Robert's heart attack. She asked about his medications, his daily routine when he was alone. I thought she was concerned about his health. Now I know she was planning his murder. I gave her the information that almost killed my husband. I enabled this through my blindness to what she'd become." Mother looked at me, then her eyes full of tears. "Thelma, you tried to warn me. You said Diane was becoming dangerous, that her debt and desperation were changing her. I accused you of jealousy of not wanting to share the family business. I see now that Diane manipulated me just like everyone else. She knew I'd always have a soft spot for my biological child, and she exploited it. I'm so sorry. I'm so terribly sorry for not protecting you from her." The prosecutor presented financial evidence showing Diane had been planning the takeover for at least a year. She'd studied corporate law, researched hostile takeovers, even taken online courses in financial manipulation. This wasn't a sudden breakdown, but a calculated campaign. Bank records showed she'd been living far beyond her means in Los Angeles, borrowing from increasingly dangerous sources. The company sale wasn't just about greed. It was about survival. She owed nearly $1 million to various creditors. On the third day, Diane took the stand in her own defense. Wearing a conservative suit designed to make her look vulnerable, she spun a tale of childhood neglect and sibling rivalry. "Thelma was always the golden child," she said, fake tears flowing. "The adopted daughter who could do no wrong. I was just the biological child taken for granted, expected to accept second place. When I tried to save the family business from her mismanagement, she turned everyone against me with forged documents and lies." Janet Morrison's cross-examination was surgical. "Ms. Mitchell, can you explain why your Google search history shows how to forge ownership documents 3 weeks before you claim to have discovered these allegedly fake papers?" Diane stammered about research for a movie role. "Which movie? Who was the director? Where are the scripts?" With each question, Diane's story crumbled. By the end, she was screaming about conspiracies and favoritism, showing the jury exactly who she really was beneath the victim act. The verdict came back in less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. As the judge read the charges, Diane stared at me with pure hatred. 25 years in federal prison with possibility of parole in 15. Restitution of $2 million to the company. Lifetime ban from any involvement in Mitchell Construction. As the bailiffs led her away, she turned one last time. "This isn't over," she mouthed silently. But it was. The sister I'd grown up with was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing her face. Outside the courthouse, employees and supporters cheered the verdict. Tom Jameson shook my hand. "Your grandmother would be proud. You protected her legacy and showed more grace than anyone could expect. Mitchell Construction is lucky to have you." Other clients echoed similar sentiments. The attempted hostile takeover had actually strengthened our business relationships. People respected how we'd handled the crisis, how we'd protected our workers and honored our contracts despite the chaos. Back at the office, I called an all-hands meeting. "We've been through hell together," I told the assembled staff. "Some of you risked your careers to support what was right. That loyalty will be rewarded. Effective immediately, we're implementing profit sharing for all employees, expanding health benefits, and creating an employee ownership program. Grandmother Grace built this company on the principle that workers deserve to share in their success. It's time we fully honored that vision." Carlos spoke for many when he responded. "Miss Thelma, we didn't stand by you for rewards. We did it because you've always stood by us. When my son needed surgery, you made sure insurance covered it. When Hurricane Maria hit you, sent crews to help rebuild, no questions asked. That's the Mitchell Construction we believe in. That's the legacy worth protecting." The room erupted in applause, and I felt Grandmother Grace's presence, approving and proud. That evening, I visited my father in his new apartment near the office. He'd decided the family home held too many painful memories. How do you process having one daughter try to kill you while the other saves your life? He asked, staring at old family photos. How did I miss what Diane was becoming? The signs were there, her escalating lies, her desperation for money, her resentment. But I wanted to believe both my girls were good. I failed as a father. No, Dad, I said firmly. You loved us both equally. Diane's choices were her own. Mental illness doesn't make someone attempt murder. Millions of people struggle with personality disorders without becoming criminals. She chose every step on this path. The only failure would be letting her destroy what you and grandmother built. We are going to make Mitchell Construction stronger than ever. That's how we honor the good parts of our history while acknowledging the painful truths. As I drove home to my own family, I thought about the journey from that first laughing moment when I'd received Diane's termination email. If she'd only known about the ownership documents, would she have acted differently? Probably not. The greed and hatred ran too deep. But Grandmother Grace's wisdom had protected more than just shares in a company. She'd protected the workers who depended on us, the legacy of honest business, and ultimately, she'd protected me from a sister who would have destroyed everything for money. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't money or property. Sometimes it's the tools to defend yourself against those who would take everything from you. 6 months after the trial, Mitchell Construction was thriving in ways I never imagined possible. The attempted takeover had galvanized our workforce and attracted new clients who valued integrity over quick profits. We'd landed the largest contract in company history, a $100 million mixed-use development that would provide steady work for 5 years. But more importantly, we'd become a model for how family businesses could evolve beyond nepotism and dysfunction into something truly collaborative. The employee profit-sharing program had transformed our company culture. Workers who'd once punched clocks now thought like owners, suggesting improvements and innovations that saved money and time. Carlos, promoted to vice president of operations, implemented safety protocols that became industry standards. His first act was establishing a scholarship fund for employees' children named after Grandmother Grace. She believed in building futures, not just buildings, he said at the announcement ceremony. Diane's prison letters started arriving 3 months into her sentence. The first few were vitriolic rants about stolen birthrights and corrupted justice. I threw them away unread after scanning for any new threats. But then the tone changed. She began writing about therapy sessions about diagnosed conditions she'd never acknowledged, about the crushing debt that had driven her to desperation. I wasn't ready to forgive, might never be, but I could finally see the human being beneath the monster who'd tried to kill our father. Mother's journey was perhaps the most difficult. After testifying against Diane, she'd entered therapy to deal with her enabling behavior and guilt. I created a competition between you two that never should have existed, she told me during one of our cautious coffee meetings. I was so worried about Diane feeling replaced by an adopted child that I overcompensated, making her believe she deserved special treatment just for being biological. I failed both my daughters by not treating you equally. The road to reconciliation was long, but we were finally walking it. Rita had worked hard to earn back trust. Starting in an entry-level position, she'd proven her commitment through long hours and humility. When employees were skeptical of her presence, she'd addressed it head-on. I betrayed family for a promise of power that was always a lie. I'm here to make amends through actions, not words. Judge me by what I do now, not what I did then. Her genuine remorse and solid work eventually won people over. Sometimes redemption is possible when people truly own their mistakes. Sandra's path was different. After resigning, she'd started her own HR consulting firm, specializing in business ethics and preventing workplace betrayals. She sent referrals our way and always spoke highly of Mitchell Construction, but we maintained professional distance. At my daughter's birthday party, she'd sent a gift with a note. I pray she grows up with the integrity I temporarily lost. Thank you for showing me that some things matter more than money. Forgiveness didn't require restored friendship. Some relationships couldn't survive certain betrayals, and that was okay. The profit-sharing program's first dividend distribution was emotional. Workers who'd never received more than hourly wages suddenly held checks representing their share of company success. Maria Bryan's sister, who'd warned us about Sandra's betrayal, broke down crying. "This is more than money," she said. "This is recognition that we all build this company together. Your grandmother would be so proud." The checks weren't huge, but they represented a fundamental shift in how we valued contribution. Father returned to work part-time as an advisor, his near-death experience having given him new perspective. "I spent 40 years building this company," he reflected during a management meeting. "But I never really understood what Mama Grace meant about it belonging to everyone who helped build it. Diane's betrayal taught me something. When you treat a business like a personal piggy bank, you corrupt everything it stands for. What you've built here, Thelma, this is what she envisioned." The investigation into Dad's poisoning had revealed the depth of Diane's planning. She'd researched dosages carefully aiming for a death that would appear natural to avoid autopsy. The life insurance policies purchased incrementally to avoid suspicion totaled $15 million across various companies. She'd even drafted a speech for his funeral found on her laptop where she positioned herself as the grieving daughter ready to carry on his legacy. The calculated cruelty still took my breath away. But from that darkness came unexpected light. The publicity around our case had attracted other family businesses facing similar succession crises. I began speaking at industry conferences about protecting companies from internal threats, about the importance of transparent ownership structures, about recognizing warning signs of financial desperation in family members. The Mitchell method, as some called it, helped dozens of companies avoid their own hostile takeovers. Grandmother Grace's wisdom was spreading far beyond our single company. 1 year after the trial, Vincent Torino's conviction made national news. He'd received 40 years for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. During his allocution, he'd mentioned Diane as the most cold-blooded client I ever made the mistake of accepting. Even career criminals found her willingness to murder family for money disturbing. His conviction also meant Diane's debt to his organization was legally void, removing any lingering threats to our family's safety. The company's success allowed us to expand our community involvement. We established a foundation providing free construction training for at-risk youth, turning potential criminals into skilled workers. Every person we train is someone who won't end up desperate enough to do what Diane did, I explained to the board. The program's first graduate, a young man who'd been heading toward gang involvement, now worked as an apprentice carpenter. Redemption took many forms. Visiting Dad on Father's Day, I found him in his garden, a new hobby that brought him peace. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," he said, not looking up from his tomatoes. "Not for Diane's sake, but for ours. Carrying hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'll never forget what she tried to do, but I refuse to let her steal any more of my life through bitterness." His words echoed Grandmother Grace's philosophy of choosing peace over prolonged conflict. The third anniversary of the takeover attempt coincided with breaking ground on our biggest project yet. As I stood with golden shovel in hand, surrounded by employees who'd become family, I thought about the journey. Diane had inadvertently given us a gift through her betrayal. She'd forced us to evolve to strengthen bonds to build something more meaningful than mere profit. The company she'd tried to destroy had become stronger than ever because we'd chosen unity over division transparency, over secrets, shared success over hoarded wealth. That evening, I sat in Grandmother Grace's old chair, now in my office, reading her journals. One entry stood out. "Money doesn't corrupt people, it reveals them. When someone shows you their true nature, believe them. But also remember that redemption is possible for those who genuinely seek it. Build your life and business on foundations strong enough to weather any storm, including betrayal from those you love. The greatest revenge against those who try to tear you down is building something so beautiful they can only watch from afar, knowing they chose destruction over participation in that beauty. I closed the journal and looked at the portraits on my wall. 3 generations of Mitchells, each adding their strength to our legacy. Diane's portrait had been removed, but I kept one photo from when we were children building sandcastles together. Before money and jealousy poisoned her. Before she chose greed over family. It reminded me that people aren't born evil. They choose it step by step, decision by decision. And just as surely the rest of us can choose differently. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Mitchell, the news crew is here for the interview about the employee ownership program." I straightened my jacket and prepared to share our story again. Not the salacious details of attempted murder and corporate espionage, but the deeper truth. That businesses built on shared success and mutual respect could survive anything, even betrayal from within. That Grandmother Grace's vision of collective prosperity wasn't just idealistic. It was practical armor against those who would destroy everything for personal gain. As I walked to meet the news crew, I passed the construction floor where workers were finishing their shift. They waved and called out greetings partners in success rather than mere employees. This was what Diane had tried to steal and sell. Not just a company, but a community. Not just profits, but purpose. She'd failed because she'd never understood that Mitchell Construction's true value wasn't in its bank accounts or property holdings. It was in the people who showed up every day to build something together. I thought about her in her prison cell, wondering if she ever understood what she'd lost. Not just freedom or wealth, but the chance to be part of something meaningful. The irony was bitter. She'd wanted easy money so badly that she'd thrown away the opportunity to earn real wealth through honest work. She'd been so focused on taking that she'd never learned the joy of building. But her failure had taught the rest of us an invaluable lesson. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing their true colors because it forces you to see your own more clearly. Diane's betrayal had revealed the strength of our bonds, the depth of our principles, the power of choosing cooperation over competition. We'd emerged not just intact, but transformed. And in that transformation, Grandmother Grace's deepest wisdom had proven true. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building the life you deserve while those who chose destruction can only watch from afar, prisoners of their own choices. Some people try to tear down what others build because they can't imagine creating anything themselves. But those who build together create something. No betrayal can destroy a legacy of shared success that grows stronger with each passing day. I learned that blood may be thicker than water, but integrity is thicker than both. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. And sometimes the best response to those who try to destroy your life is simply to build a better one that stands as permanent proof that choosing construction over destruction, unity over division, and love over greed will always be the winning strategy. Grandmother Grace knew this. Now, thanks to Diane's spectacular failure, we all did too. What would you do if a family member tried to destroy everything you'd built together? Have you ever had to stand up to a relative who put money before family? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family dynamics. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about triumph over betrayal. Remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living well and building something beautiful from the ashes of what others tried to burn down. Thank you for joining me today, and may you always have the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it means standing against family. Until next time, Keep building your dreams and protecting them from those who would tear them down.